Well, that was easy. Hi, I'm Robert McBride of All Classical Portland, and this is Carlos Kalmar, Music Director of the Oregon Symphony.
Good evening. Hi.
And this is the Steinway and Sons grand piano that Emanuel Ax was playing just a few minutes ago, and I came in and heard him and thought, doesn't he know these pieces by now? Had the music in front of him and everything.
Yeah, you think you could have asked him that, because I actually told Manny this. We were talking about the Burleske by Strauss, and I said, we both agree that it's kind of a pity that you don't play this piece more often, because it's a good piece of music. And I told him, you know, actually, in our program books, there is always this thing, when was it last played by the Oregon Symphony? And the last time this piece was played was, I think, 1989, soloist Emanuel Ax.
I recorded that concert back in the day when I used to do that sort of thing.
So he played it back then already.
So he knows it.
He knows it.
Yeah.
But you know, these soloists, they are perfectionists.
Oh, yes.
The greatest, like Manny.
Sure.
He puts in all the hours.
Actually, there was a cute moment because he was sitting here warming up and he was playing this one really tricky spot, and the piece is replete with tricky spots. And Justin was standing next to him, and Manny got up and Justin said, "Do you always nail that?" And he walks off stage and said, "No, I never nail it." And this is your first time working with Emanuel Ax.
Yeah, it was about time.
Yeah,
we're having
amazing.
a great time.
Good, I'm glad. Well, he's such a nice man.
Yes.
And such a treat for us to get to hear him play two different pieces, and they're completely, utterly different. Actually, this concert is all about Florestan and Eusebius, as it were, two completely different musical personalities. And even in Beethoven, I mean, you're beginning with Beethoven and you're ending with Beethoven, and they couldn't be more different.
Actually, we could have done a quiz, in a way, and not said what the first and the last piece was, and not revealed who the composer of the first and last piece, and just guessing game. Of course, it's very likely you can recognize a symphony by Beethoven. He only wrote 9, and it's popular music, but to recognize Beethoven in the Grosse Fuge that opens the program, I don't think so.
Yeah, you're going to be scaring people away with that first piece. That is intense Beethoven. And then the Symphony No. 8 at the end is
just joyful.
Fun
it's
and
just
games.
Funny.
Yeah, it is funny.
It's very funny in Beethoven's own way, which essentially this program is in very clear divided halves. The first is kind of, it's not only the first is very serious and the second is not really. It's also that the first appeals to the kind of old style of composition, if you will, meaning fugue. Who was the master of the fugue? Johann Sebastian Bach. So you put a Bach with it, and then you go into a funny 20-minute piece by Richard Strauss, and then you go into a humorous, not funny piece by Beethoven, humorous. I mean, because you know, you read about Beethoven and you try to imagine how this man actually, not only how he looked like, but also how he was, and I do not know whether I would have liked his sense of humor. I always picture Beethoven as obviously he didn't care about how he was dressed, and probably not really great manners, and probably laughing very, very loudly when actually you don't want to hear anybody laughing loudly. That's kind of Beethoven.
Haydn was the rose of Vienna and Beethoven was the thorn.
Pretty much. I mean, Vienna had a lot to offer in that sense. But, you know, there's always this thing with where you imagine how was a composer as a person? And sometimes there are complete contradictions. Actually, I don't think that Beethoven's, what I can picture him as a human being, was a contradiction to his music. Revolutionary, forward-thinking.
Uncompromising.
Uncompromising, big accents, always going for it. I can see that. And but still, comparing the two pieces that we are going to play tonight, it's not even, they are not even so far apart in terms of years, but they are miles away from each other. And in terms of personality, well, Mozart is always the best example for a person whose personality and what he actually wrote are probably two different cups of tea. Mozart, the gambler, party guy.
I am a vulgar man, Majesty, but I assure you my music is not.
Exactly.
Right. We all saw Amadeus, right? One of the greatest movies ever. So anybody here who's never heard this Grosse Fuge by Beethoven?
Raise your hands. Who has
Whoa.
never heard
Oh my
Grosse
goodness.
Fuge?
Wow.
Good luck.
Yeah. Be scared. Be very scared. It is intense music. Stravinsky said of it that it's modern music and will always be modern music. And it kind of sounds like that way to me. It still is. I think this is probably the fourth or fifth different version of it I've heard. String quartet, string orchestra, piano. There are at least two different string orchestra versions. Have you done it before?
No.
Ah, it's a first.
No, this is a first, and I think it will not be the last. The piece in the end is fun, in a certain way. This is a very unusual piece of music in that it belongs actually to a string quartet, and the string quartet, which is one of the very late pieces Beethoven wrote, in practically all of the very late string quartets, Beethoven takes completely off. He's not even, in a way, his mind goes places. I mean, we all know he wrote his Symphony number 9 and influenced the world by that, etc., and revolutionized the form of the symphony. But still, because we all know number 9 so well, and because number 9 is so melodic and has this phenomenally beautiful third movement, and we all know the Ode to Joy, okay, that's fine. It's somehow sublime but earthy, if you will. But his late string quartets, and mainly the Grosse Fuge, is Beethoven. His mind goes places that actually are modern in the 21st century. And you are very astounded about what comes out of this man. And so what happened was Beethoven writes his string quartet and presents it to the public, and the string quartet is way, way longer than what anybody thinks, and way more complex. And at the end, the last movement of this original string quartet, Opus 130, is the Grosse Fuge, this piece that you're going to hear tonight. That piece alone is 19 minutes long. Yeah, this is not no short undertaking. And the publisher said, communicated to Beethoven, who was deaf, pretty much 100% deaf at that time, said, you can't do that. This is way too much for whatever we can even understand. Make the Grosse Fuge its own piece. And that's how this came about. And over years then, especially at the very late 19th century, beginning 20th century, there were people, conductors, in our case, Felix von Weingartner, great conductor, who took this piece and barely touching it, did this with a string orchestra. It's a string orchestra version.
Does he add double basses?
He just adds basses occasionally.
And then does he have everybody some of the time and then just a few people some of the time?
No, it's everybody plays all the time. So you play the string quartet, you add sometimes a bass, and instead of playing one person, one voice, it's many persons, many people, one voice. And it's a very valid way to do this. Now, the surprising thing about the Grosse Fuge is, you know, a fugue, and this is a big fugue. A fugue is basically you have a theme, and the theme travels through the different voices that you have over a period of time. And then the fugue theme gets if I can use the word constricted. So when, let's say, it takes 10 seconds at the beginning to formulate the theme, later it will take 5. You compress it, and stuff like that happens. It's very technical what happens in a fugue from the point of view of a composer. Now the funny thing is, Beethoven writes a fugue theme that is complex in itself, and that fugue theme appears for the first time in its complete version at the very last minute. Until then, the first 18 minutes, it's always, he cuts it off here and there. Now what you're going to hear is music that is either loud or very soft-spoken. It's easier to follow the very soft-spoken because it's also slow. That is kind of easier, and it's slightly more approachable, the music there. But when it gets loud, especially in the first 2/3 of the piece, it sounds so modern that for myself, the best explanation I have is this is like heavy metal written by Ludwig van Beethoven. And there is a certain intensity is, of course, the word, but also there is somewhat some anger in this music. This is
That's how it's always struck me. Yeah.
I mean, it's like all the time. I mean, the beginning is fine, then it gets very quiet. Then the first time you hear the theme, kind of like, aha, that's the theme, it's like a whisper. And then brace yourself, because then we get to business. And it's mind-boggling, this entire piece. Towards the end, he has a couple of segments, half a minute here, half a minute there, where it sounds like the Beethoven that we all know. It does, meaning it's melodic, you still hear the theme somewhere, but boy, this piece is, it's interesting.
You're making me really want to hear it, which is why we do these conversations. So, wow, thank you.
Yeah,
Did you ever play this when you were a violinist?
Oh, no, I couldn't. This was way back when I was a violinist. I was way too lazy. Because this you have to be really good. Really, this is really hard to play. So kudos to the Oregon Symphony string players who will embark on. It's a trip. Trust me, it's quite something.
And then, as we said, the Symphony No. 8 at the end of the concert is the other side of the coin. It's very lively and witty and fun. And did you throw them any curves with that? Because they've played it before.
I just thought it's a great way to present one of our most beloved composers in two very different ways. And Symphony No. 8, it was kind of, let's say, it was due. And I mean, I actually didn't think about myself. I rarely do when I program, but let's say at least I had the great advantage of having a piece in front of me, Beethoven No. 8, which together with Symphony No. 1 is the Beethoven symphony I have conducted the least in my life. It just happens. I've done No. 9 many times. No. 5 many times. No. 3 many, etc. Well, anyway. No. 8 not so many times.
How about this Bach D minor concerto and the Strauss Burleske that Emanuel Ax is playing?
I have never looked at the Bach D minor concerto. I've done another Bach concerto, and I've done the Burleske. Yes.
It's a fun program for you with the variety and some of it new to you, sort of new to you, some of it not.
Yeah,
have a good time.
I mean, there is a good time to be had for several reasons. First of all, because as we were talking about it, you have Beethoven, if you want to say it that way, the intellectual and the more rambunctious human being. Let's go and have some fun. Symphony 8. And then you have Johann Sebastian Bach, where it's very little you actually can say about that piece in particular. It's just when you mention Johann Sebastian Bach, you are kind of shrug and say, what is there to be said? Greatest genius, end of story. It's phenomenal music. It's just a little less emotional. It's a very different way of approaching the idea of what music is. And then is intermission. Then comes Richard Strauss, which is exactly in the other corner of what music does.
So feel free to drink during intermission.
Good advice. Because Strauss is anything but intellectual, especially that piece. Actually, that piece has a little bit of a funny story, which might not in its entirety be true. Strauss was actually very, very young when he wrote this. He was 21. And this piece is written as a thank you for the great conductor who also played brilliantly the piano, Hans von Bülow. Because Hans von Bülow gave Strauss his first job as a conductor in Meiningen, which is East Germany. And so he wrote this piece for Hans von Bülow, and he presented to him as a thank you, and Hans von Bülow was not happy with this piece and just didn't like it and rejected it. Allegedly, Bülow rejected the piece because he had very small hands, and you need bigger hands. That's what I thought, because I read it. Please never believe what you read. I talked to Emanuel Ax about this, and Manny told me, come on, that's not true. He simply didn't like the piece. You don't need gigantic hands to play that. You just need to be, you have to be a good pianist.
You want to hear the worst joke in the world?
We can't wait for that one.
Why do radio announcers have small hands? We pause for station identification.
Oh.
Isn't that awful? That is the worst joke. We return you now to your regularly scheduled pre-concert conversation.
So the piece, by the way, disappeared for 4 years. And then a fellow composer, a friend of Richard Strauss, Eugen d'Albert, heard that there is a piece, and he talked to Richard Strauss, and they reworked a couple of passages, and that's how it was premiered. And that's how it was later published, and the rest pretty much is history. It's not a piece that is being played very often, but, and it's very young, Richard Strauss. It's like, you know, we are here in Oregon, we all, when you live in Oregon, you better like wine. It's like very young wine, very young, meaning you barely, but you can already like smell there is genius there. So that's how this burlesque, it's a scherzo. The title burlesque might be a little bit misleading. Burlesque is kind of a joke or something, and it's a joyful piece. It's very melodic. It's very virtuosic. And as I was talking to Emanuel Ax, it really needs a player like him, because you know, early in Richard Strauss, or let's say in pieces that are either very early or quite late, where Strauss is not, in terms of what he invents, not at the top of his game, meaning the core of the music is not that great, as in other pieces that we all know, like Zarathustra or Till Eulenspiegel. Everything still sounds great, and if you add too much to that equation as an interpreter, it sounds like you are eating a piece of cake with frosting this thick, meaning too much. So if Emanuel Ax is a guy who really controls the frosting very well.
This is really going to be fun.
Yeah.
You just finished, or nearly finished, another CD with the Oregon Symphony, an all-American CD. Well, you still have to do the editing and all that stuff.
Sure.
But, so, all-American, Copland 3, the incredible flutist suite by Walter Piston, which is incredibly delightful, and that little jazz symphony by George Antheil, a rarity. And this will be available later this year sometime?
I have no control about when, but I would be surprised if it doesn't get done by May.
Okay. And you really should have, as fans of the Oregon Symphony, all of the recordings that they make with Carlos, because they're so wonderful and interesting and fun, and they're historical documents of this fabulous time in the orchestra's history with you. So get out there and buy those things. And you can do that at the table in the lobby, as a matter of fact, tonight.
Well, as you know, there are already 2 CDs out of the Oregon Symphony where I'm conducting, and this is the 3rd, and I hope others are going to come to follow suit. But just not to distract, because yes, we just finished recording. It has been a busy time, the year's end, for sure, for all of us. But the thing is that tonight's program, I think with all the variables, the variety of the program, that is for me one of the most attractive things. And by the way, speaking about tapping a little bit again into Beethoven, Beethoven had just written his Symphony No. 7, which is kind of obvious when the next number is 8, meaning there is no gap between them. And he had just met a very important person in somewhere in a salon in Vienna. He met Melzel, Johann Nepomuk Melzel, who was the inventor of the metronome. And that is why the second movement sounds like it sounds. The second movement actually is an homage or a little joke on Melzel, because the winds for most of the movement do it's a metronome. And I mean, the thing is that this Symphony No. 8 by Beethoven, he himself called it the little one. And it's kind of surprising when you see the progress in his works. You see the big No. 3 and No. 5, which we all know, and the Pastoral, and the 7th, which is a very important symphony, and then we come to No. 9. And what on earth is little No. 8 doing there? What happened to this guy? Well, actually, Symphony No. 8 is more important, more inventive in the end than No. 7. It's just not as famous. And because everything is shorter, you think, okay, Beethoven, good music, basta. But it's not like that. Actually, specifically, the last movement is amazing music. All the jokes that he played, because the last movement is it's a very fast movement, really, really fast, and it plays not by itself, but it trickles down in very speedy manner, and always Beethoven hammers on a wrong note. And at the beginning, because it's this F major and nice, C sharp, wrong note. And then it goes F major, C sharp. And at the beginning you think like, okay, no consequences. And then he does it again and nothing really happens. You think, okay, he was maybe in a bad mood, or he was in one of his jokes that nobody understands but himself. And at the end, in the coda that he writes, which is a very long coda, finally we get to know why he did that, because all of a sudden this wrong note becomes the right note. And he elaborates on this quote-unquote wrong note. And once he does that, me being a musician, I think, okay, Ludwig, how are you going to get back into where you actually belong? But he's a genius. He does that very well. And the ending of the symphony, it's, in a way, also that is funny. You know, one of the things that Beethoven does very often in his symphonies is at the end, when he goes to where he belongs in terms of the tonality where he wants to do, he hammers it on you.